At my grandfather's funeral, my dad stood boldly, making a shocking announcement that left everyone speechless. "I've decided to remarry," he said, a smirk on his face. "This time to someone younger and more stunning, right, Julia?" Julia, one of his younger employees, beamed and clung to his arm, amused by his words. Amid the funeral's somber atmosphere, my dad's words felt out of place. "Isn't today supposed to be about remembering the departed?" I thought, unable to hide my disdain. Then Aunt Teresa, always the comforting presence, wrapped her arms around me. "Emily, you'll come live with us," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Don't worry about child support, it's not needed." That day marked a new chapter in my life, moving in with Aunt Teresa and her husband. 2 months after the move, my dad reached out, but I had already made up my mind about him. "The only dad I recognize is Dennis," I told him, cutting off any attempt at reconciliation. Despite his pleas and anger, I remained firm in my stance, ready to move on from his shadow. "I'm Emily Osment, a 15-year-old who enjoys the simple pleasures of middle school life and the freedom of being an only child. My mom, a beacon of kindness, and I share a close bond, with our weekend shopping trips being a highlight. My biological father was never the parent I needed, always absent and cold. I couldn't understand my mom's choice in him, a sentiment that grew stronger with each passing day. Despite everything, my dreams of marriage and family remained intact, largely thanks to Aunt Teresa and her husband Dennis. They were the epitome of a loving couple, treating me like their own despite not having children due to Dennis's past illness. Their love story, faced with challenges and opposition, only reinforced my belief in the power of love and family unity. As I navigated my new life with them, I carried the lessons of love, resilience, and the importance of choosing the right people to call family. Now, Aunt Teresa, Dennis, and my mom share a strong bond, but my dad's behavior towards Dennis has always been hurtful and unfair. He often makes mean comments, criticizing Dennis for not being able to have children and accusing him of marrying for money. This is why I grew to dislike my dad and promised myself I would never grow up to be like him. Right when I began school, my grandparents organized a big party to celebrate. They own a large house and are well known in the community, owning several businesses. My mom, Teresa, and Dennis are all in charge of different parts of the family business, while my dad works as an ordinary employee in one of these companies. Even as a kid, I found it strange, but it became clear that my dad wasn't trusted to handle more responsibility due to his actions. At the party, my dad, trying to make a joke in front of my grandfather, suggested he should be given a company to run, hinting at the awkwardness of his position compared to his wife. The room's mood quickly shifted from warm to chilly. Ignoring the tension, my dad pressed on, suggesting they should switch roles to fix the situation. My mom calmly cut off the inappropriate conversation, but my dad, fueled by alcohol, raised his voice, disrupting the peace. My dad's outburst was almost laughable compared to my mom's calm demeanor. He ranted about why he had to be just an employee, claiming he had earned his position fairly. His logic was flawed, and as the room grew tense, my grandfather intervened. He pointed out that giving my dad more responsibility would likely lead to disaster, reminding him of a past mistake that almost cost the family business dearly. The incident in question involved my dad having an affair with a client's daughter, a move that nearly brought the company to its knees when the client threatened to cut all ties. This revelation made me feel both embarrassed and sorry for my dad. Despite his protest that the event was a decade old and should be forgotten, it was clear his past actions still had consequences. My grandfather's firm stance made it evident that trust and responsibility in our family's business were earned, not entitled, highlighting the gap between my dad's expectations and his actual contributions. During the party, my mom quickly silenced my dad's rant, leaving him visibly irritated. With a sigh of exasperation, he finished his drink in one go and exited the room, muttering apologies for ruining the mood. My grandpa reassured me, placing the blame on my dad, not us, and gently patted my head. With my dad gone, we picked up the celebration spirit again. I received some thoughtful gifts, an electronic dictionary from my grandparents, a book voucher from my mom, and the sneakers I'd been eyeing from Teresa and Dennis. These presents lifted my mood, despite my dad's earlier sourness. Returning home, my dad's presence and his dismissive remark about my gifts briefly dampened my spirits. However, his lack of genuine enthusiasm couldn't overshadow the joy the gifts brought me. Later, Aunt Teresa and Uncle Dennis surprised me with an invitation to join them on a summer vacation trip abroad, perfectly timing it with my mom's business trip. Expecting my dad to react negatively, I was taken aback when he supported the idea, mentioning his coinciding business trip. His unusual cheerfulness about work puzzled me, but the excitement for the vacation with Teresa and Dennis overshadowed any odd feelings. The trip was everything I could have hoped for. Breathtaking views, delicious cuisine, and luxury beyond my everyday life. Teresa even planned a special shopping day for the three of us, which thrilled me to no end. As we immersed ourselves in shopping and enjoyed tea and cake on a terrace, our perfect day was abruptly interrupted, Teresa's gaze fixed on a sight that made my heart sink. My dad, unmistakably cozying up with a young woman, both donned in casual aloha shirts. This wasn't new. My dad's history of infidelity was a shadow over our family, often dragging me into uncomfortable situations. Despite my deep love for my mom, I had learned to accept his actions with a heavy heart, though it never got easier. Teresa, filled with righteous anger, was ready to confront the situation, but I suggested we handle it differently. We decided to take a photo and send it to my mom, curious and anxious about her response. This approach, though painful, felt like the right step in dealing with my dad's repeated betrayals, marking yet another challenging moment in our family's story. The news of my mom's sudden passing hit me like a lightning strike. I was in disbelief, my heart sinking into an abyss of shock and sorrow. Teresa, after confirming the tragic news with my grandmother, couldn't hold back her tears. Dennis, trying to keep steady, took the phone, but the weight of grief was too much for us all. We hurried back home, rushing straight to the hospital to see my mom for the last time. The sight of her, lying there motionless, unleashed a torrent of tears from my eyes. Teresa, overwhelmed by grief, needed support, so Dennis guided her away, leaving me to face the harsh reality with my grandparents. My mom had heroically sacrificed herself to save a child who had carelessly run into the street. She acted as a shield, absorbing the impact of an oncoming car, which led to her critical injuries and eventual death. The child, miraculously, suffered only minor injuries. As I tried to process this heroic yet heartbreaking tale, I couldn't help but wonder about my father's whereabouts. My grandparents were clueless too. He was abroad, I informed them, sharing the bitter truth of his infidelity. When my father finally appeared, 5 days after the tragedy and just in time for the funeral, his reaction to my mom's heroic act was cold and detached, calling it foolish. His lack of empathy and respect shocked everyone. Unfazed by the stares of disbelief, he assumed the role of the chief mourner, a position quickly corrected by my grandfather. The funeral took a turn for the surreal when my father, standing by my mom's side, callously threw his wedding ring at her, declaring his freedom with a cruel laugh. He then announced his plans to remarry, introducing Julia, a younger woman from the crowd, who clung to him, seemingly amused by the situation. His actions and words, devoid of any decency or respect for the solemn occasion, left everyone in shock. Teresa, ever the protective presence, assured me that I would be living with her and Dennis, dismissing any notion of child support from my father as unnecessary. Thus, I began a new chapter of my life under their care, a stark contrast to the chaos my father left behind. Despite his later attempt to reach out, the bond was irrevocably broken, his earlier actions having set the course for our estranged relationship. When my father unexpectedly reached out for help, I firmly told him that Dennis was the only father figure in my life before ending the call and blocking his number. Despite his attempts to invoke sympathy, I was determined not to let his previous actions go unchallenged. My resolve hardened as I learned he had reached out to various relatives, only to find himself ostracized due to his behavior at the funeral. No one was willing to associate with him, reflecting the collective disapproval of his actions. One day, while I was at my grandfather's company on an errand, I overheard my father causing a commotion outside the CEO's office. He was trying to excuse his behavior at the funeral as a momentary lapse in judgment. My grandfather's response highlighted the gravity of throwing a wedding ring at one's deceased wife, a gesture of profound disrespect. My father's weak attempt to claim confusion and profess his love for my mother was met with disbelief. Overhearing this exchange, I couldn't stay silent. My father, noticing my presence, tried to persuade me to vouch for his so-called love for my mom. But fueled by anger and disappointment, I voiced the truth about his lack of love and the pain he caused us. His reaction was one of rage, even demanding repayment for my upbringing as if it was a transaction, not a father's duty. At that moment, I was reminded of my mom's will, which explicitly denied him any inheritance due to his infidelity, highlighting his absence in contributing to our household. His ludicrous claim of managing my inheritance under the guise of not having divorced. My mom showed his desperation and misunderstanding of legal procedures. The divorce was already finalized, making his claims baseless. His suggestion to retract the divorce documents, as if it was a simple error that could be undone, showed a lack of understanding of legal systems and further emphasized his selfish motives. Even as a middle schooler, I could see through his manipulations and the shallow depth of his parental affection, which seemed rooted more in financial interest than genuine care. Understanding the legalities and the finality of my parents' divorce was clear to me, but my father seemed lost, clinging to a past that no longer existed. His attempt to dispute the divorce based on a supposed mutual love was met with disbelief and even laughter from my grandfather and me. His frustration grew as we couldn't take his delusions seriously. When confronted with the reality that my mom had initiated the divorce, his shock was palpable, leading to a breakdown behind the closed door. It was clear he hadn't anticipated my mom's decision, perhaps underestimating the depth of her resolve. The revelation that my mom had wanted a divorce, especially after learning about another of his infidelities during our coincidental trip abroad, seemed to hit him hard. His tears and questions about why she would leave him, despite his faults, betrayed a man struggling to come to terms with the consequences of his actions. Yet, despite his emotional turmoil, I found it hard to muster any sympathy for him. The situation escalated when security had to intervene, removing him from the premises as he resisted, still grappling with the reality of his actions and their repercussions. In the aftermath, my grandfather and I shared a moment of reflection, pondering what my mom ever saw in him. The decision to involve the company lawyer and secure a restraining order was swift, ensuring our safety and marking a definitive boundary my father could no longer cross. In the days that followed, I sought solace in the presence of my Aunt Theresa, trying to find some normalcy in shopping trips and daily life. However, an unexpected encounter with my father outside a department store shattered that semblance of normalcy. His appearance was shocking, unkempt, dirty, and desperate. He was a shadow of the man he once was. His plea for money, driven by sheer desperation, was a stark contrast to the father I remembered. His fall from grace was complete when he revealed that his new partner had left him, taking with her the illusion of a better life he had chased. His plea for help, rooted in familial ties, was hard to reconcile with the pain he had caused. It was a painful reminder of how far he had fallen, not just in terms of his financial and social standing, but in the eyes of his family. His situation, while pitiful, was the culmination of his own choices, a bitter truth he was forced to confront in the most humiliating way. In the face of my father's desperate and disheveled plea for help, I nearly let my anger get the best of me, biting back a harsh retort. Beside me, Theresa, now my legal guardian, was visibly seething with anger over his audacity to seek sympathy after all the hurt he caused. Despite his apologies, it was clear that his remorse was shallow, only surfacing due to his current predicament. In a firm and calm voice, I informed him of the legal adoption that had taken place, making Theresa my official mother and legally severing any ties I had with him. His shock was evident, a result of his long-standing neglect and failure to understand the consequences of his actions. His concern quickly shifted to the matter of inheritance, to which I coldly clarified that there was nothing left for him, highlighting the absence of any financial obligations towards him from our side. His reaction was one of indignation, clinging to the outdated notion of parental entitlement despite his failures. But I stood my ground, expressing my disdain for his past actions and making it clear that any affection or respect he presumed was owed to him was non-existent. The mention of the restraining order was the final straw, emphasizing the legal and emotional distance now between us. As security intervened to prevent him from following Theresa and me, the reality of his isolation became palpable. Even as he was taken away by the police, his calls for me in defiance of the restraining order were a testament to his delusion and desperation. In the following days, a meeting was convened at my grandparents' home, with my father and Julia, the woman from the funeral, present. Their nervousness was palpable, a stark contrast to their previous arrogance. My grandfather, alongside our lawyer, laid out the purpose of the gathering. It was revealed that, while my mother's will initially didn't pursue alimony or deny inheritance to my father, The continuous disturbances and the emotional toll he inflicted on us had led to a decision to seek damages. This included pursuing claims not just for the emotional distress caused by the affair, but also against Julia for her role in the situation. This shift towards holding my father and Julia accountable marked a turning point, not just in seeking justice for their actions, but in affirming the strength and unity of our family. The legal steps being taken were a testament to the resolve of Teresa, Dennis, and my grandparents to protect our well-being and honor my mother's memory, ensuring that the consequences of my father's actions were finally being addressed. In a decisive meeting led by our lawyer, the announcement that my father and Julia would be pursuing alimony claims against them visibly unsettled both. Furthermore, their immediate termination from the family business was put on the table, pushing Julia into a corner of desperation. She tried to negotiate her way out by arguing the impracticality of expecting alimony payments from her if she were unemployed. Her plea, however, fell on deaf ears, especially when she attempted to deflect blame onto my father, claiming she was coerced into the affair. This accusation sparked a heated exchange between them, quickly silenced by my grandfather's commanding presence. The atmosphere was tense as the lawyer laid out the documentation for the claims against them, emphasizing the inevitability of their financial obligations. Despite Julia's reluctant compliance, my father hesitated, overwhelmed by the situation. Dennis's intervention, subtly reminding my father of the gravity of his betrayal, was powerful. He didn't need to raise. His voice, his words, heavy with disappointment and unspoken grief, made my father visibly shrink. Dennis's connection to my mother, his disapproval of my father's actions, and his unwavering support for us underscored the depth of the betrayal felt by those who had once considered my father's family. Eventually, compelled by Dennis's quiet yet impactful confrontation, my father signed the papers, a symbolic act marking his acceptance of the consequences of his actions. His departure from the room, and ultimately from our lives, was a sad moment, punctuated by the news that he had resorted to borrowing from questionable sources to fulfill his financial obligations. The choices he made, leading him to a precarious situation, were a testament to the self-destructive path he had chosen. Dennis's management of the situation, ensuring that the financial dealings were controlled, highlighted his protective nature towards our family. My father's subsequent disappearance, possibly to avoid further repercussions or the weight of his guilt, closed a painful chapter in our lives. Despite the harsh reality of his fate, it was difficult to muster sympathy for someone whose actions had led him so far astray from those he once called family. In the aftermath of everything that unfolded, I found myself harboring a sense of justice that perhaps went beyond mere forgiveness. The thought of my father facing the consequences of his actions through the pressures of his creditors seemed, in a way, fitting. Julia, too, faced a stark turn of events. Her involvement with a married man led to not only financial repercussions, but also personal ones. After being sent back to her rural hometown by her parents, she was quickly married off to a much older man, thrust into a life filled with hard labor and familial responsibilities, a consequence, it seemed, of her actions. As for me, my life has been filled with warmth and care by Teresa and Dennis, who have truly stepped into the roles of my parents. They guide me with love, sometimes firm, but always fair, ensuring that the memory of my mother is kept alive through small rituals and remembrances that bring us closer to her spirit. Their relationship stands as a beacon of hope for me, a testament to the enduring strength of love and commitment. My bond with my grandparents continues to flourish, with their boundless energy and plans for the future, including their well-intentioned but premature ideas about my education abroad. While I cherish their support, I've expressed my desire to stay grounded in my current life in Japan, surrounded by friends and the familiarity of home. School has become another area where I'm finding my footing, taking on responsibilities within the student council that challenge and fulfill me. At home, my interest in the English language has blossomed, with Teresa providing me with books that were dear to my mother. This new passion has sparked a dream in me to become a translator, a goal I'm beginning to pursue in earnest. Despite the pain of losing my mother, the love and support from those around me have been a constant source of strength. I've started keeping a diary as a way to bridge my past with my future, hoping to share my journey with my mother someday. Teresa and Dennis's understanding and acceptance have given me the space to grieve and grow in my own time, cementing their place in my heart as a second set of parents. For their upcoming anniversary, I've prepared a special gift, a gesture of my deep affection and gratitude for their unwavering support. My daily conversations with my mother's photo have become a cherished ritual, a moment of connection that starts each day on a note of hope and reflection. The clear blue sky outside seems to echo her support, a comforting thought that carries me forward.